Do you know what that is? That's all the money that I'm gonna save when I never go to the movies again. Because everyone that I ever liked in Hollywood is signing these stupid Roman Polanski petitions. Why can't some directors who suck sign this thing? Where's Michael Bay? Somebody that I already enjoy not supporting. And I mean, okay, I'm not really gonna boycott. I'm still gonna go to Canal Street and buy their movies on bootleg 5 for $20, but I'm gonna be silently judging them while I do it. Because these free Polanski petitions you guys have got, I mean, no, man, no. I'm not gonna get into too much of a dissertation about this because it's been ably covered by Kate Harding, Katha Pollitt, Chris Rock, and a bunch of other people. But there are a few things I want to reiterate. Number one, people need to be clear on the difference between what he pled to and what he was accused of. What he pled to was this ambiguous, vaguely euphemistic term, unlawful sexual conduct. But if you look at the victim's testimony and see what he was accused of, what he was accused of is not only considered rape because she was underage, and not only because he gave her drugs and alcohol to set it up, but also because he did it while she was saying no and telling him to stop. There's nothing ambiguous about that. That is a description of a rape. And her account of what happened has never changed. Even in her recent statements where she argues for dropping the whole thing so she can move on, she gives the exact same description of what happened, and it is a description of rape. Which means that if you argue this was anything but straight up rape, you either just don't know the facts, or you're saying you believe the victim was lying. And if that's your position, good luck with that, but you at least need to be real with yourself about what it is that you're saying. Point number two, let's be clear about why he got to plead to that vague, ambiguous thing. If you watch that documentary that came out last year, which was a very slanted pro-Polanski documentary, even in that film they make it clear that this plea bargain was set up by the family and their attorneys because they saw no other way to protect this girl from the trauma of a trial that would take away her anonymity and subject her to an endless media frenzy. They did not set up that plea bargain because they had any doubts about being able to prove her original charges. They set up the plea bargain because they saw a system that could not adequately protect this child, so they felt they had no other choice but to compromise and settle for something less than justice. So when we talk about this original prosecution of Polanski that never got completed, we're talking about something that was from day one a compromised process that would have been less than justice if it were completed. Which takes us to point number three, the impact of the judge's misconduct. Now, if you've seen the film, you know that after they agreed on the plea bargain, the judge did get weird in the sentencing process with a bunch of erratic maneuvers that made the prosecution and the defense feel like they couldn't trust him. So that did happen. But again, we need to be clear about what impact that had on the prosecution and the defense. The impact on the defense was they got scared of unfair treatment in the sentencing, and then Roman Polanski fled the country and there was no sentencing. They never finished it. And that, according to Polanski's defenders, means he was victimized by the judge? That sounds to me like he successfully escaped being victimized by the judge. He was afraid of getting too harsh a sentence and he wound up getting no sentence at all. He came out smelling like roses. If anything, he's the beneficiary of the judge's misconduct because it gave him an excuse to duck out of the whole thing. Meanwhile, the person who was unquestionably victimized, again, was Polanski's accuser. For her, the process not being finished meant that she never got any kind of resolution or closure at all. It meant that she was denied even that compromised halfway step towards justice that she thought was all she could hope for. So to me, this chapter of the story that Polanski's defenders hold up as proof that he was victimized was really just another case of his victim getting victimized again. Which brings us to point number four, his accuser's wishes for this whole thing to be dropped so that she and her family can move on. And I'm gonna call her the accuser or the survivor instead of the victim from here on out, because she's clearly worked very hard to reach a place where she no longer has to define herself as a victim. And a part of that process has been that she expressed forgiveness for Roman Polanski, which in its context seems to be much more about her reclaiming her own life on her terms than it is about really having sympathy for him. And in fact, she's actually said she has no sympathy for him. But the fact remains, she said that she forgives him and that she wants him to be left alone as well as herself. So we have to acknowledge that. We can't just brush that aside. But I do still think it's fair to point out that our laws are set up not only to protect the accuser, but also to protect we the people. That's how the system is supposed to work. And many people more qualified than me have made the argument that this is one of those cases where the state needs needs to prosecute beyond what the accuser desires for the good of the people. And even besides that, I guess I'm just not as kind-hearted as the accuser, because I don't think he's earned a free pass on this at all. It seems to me it's been 30 years since he committed the crime, and he's been unrepentant for 30 years. And if you're gonna judge this out of concern for the accuser and her desire to get closure and no longer have the courts and the media dredging up this past, then you have to acknowledge that one of the people who's been keeping her from getting that closure is Roman Polanski. That judge he was afraid of dealing with has been dead for like 15 years, and since then the government has repeatedly offered him chances to come here and wrap the whole thing up without getting more jail time. And he refused to follow through on it. Even after she had forgiven him, he refused to make any sacrifice so that she could move on. And can I tell you another thing? She also did win a civil suit against him, and from what I've read about that, he still hasn't paid her that money. He still owes her from that. So how am I supposed to believe that he's supposed to get a free pass, when even in this chapter of the story where she's forgiving him, he still comes out smelling foul? Which brings me to point number 5. I just remembered that I said this wasn't gonna be a long dissertation. Damn it. I'm sorry about that. So let me just say in conclusion, I don't deny that there are valid questions to ask about this case. If you have questions about whether Switzerland and LA County had ulterior motives in pursuing the case this way at this time, if you have questions about how well it serves the public good and the wishes of the victim, and you think there shouldn't be further consequences because of those questions, even if I disagree, I can respect those arguments, as long as you recognize none of those arguments has anything to do with whether Roman Polanski deserves further consequences. Facing further punishment is not unjust to him. He deserves whatever happens to him. This may well resolve without him facing hard time, and whatever happens, I hope it does finally resolve quickly for the sake of his accuser. But whatever does happen to Roman Polanski from here on out, I guarantee it will not be any worse than what he deserves. Anything that happens to Roman Polanski from here on out, he had it coming. Good.